hold on to your hats. The countdown to the biggest wellness event of the year is on.
Join us on August 15 and 16 in Melbourne for not 1 but 2 days of Powerhouse Wellness, featuring 11 of Australia's most inspiring, entertaining, educating, fermentating speakers.
Damo, what is fermentating?
MP, I'll tell you at the summit.
Your favourite wellness couch speakers are joined by special guest Nat Kringoudis on all things hormones and female health.
Join the Up for a Chat girls, the wellness guys, the natural nutritionist Steph Lowe, Cale Brock, Quirky Cookings, Joe Witt, Marcus Pearce, and the rest of your favourite wellness couch podcasters.
Regular and VIP tickets are still available, but hurry before this summit is sold out. For tickets, go to www.thewellnesssummit.com. The Wellness Summit is proudly brought to you by Well and You. Be someone that makes you happy.
TheWellnessCouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
I'm Julie Tenner.
And this week we've got part 2 of Exploring Birth. Last week, we really felt that, first of all, we needed to chunk it down into 2 episodes because it's such a big topic. And so last week, Jules, whose background is as a doula and a naturopath, was really about unpacking what birth culture is in Australia, so the sort of belief systems that surround birth, and also really looking at what empowered birth means. I mean, certainly both of our values align a lot with having a natural birth, and you'll certainly hear that in the way that we talk. But empowered birth is not a kind of birth. It's really about how you're feeling about birth. Is. So, for you might be, set that you want to have a cesarean, and it's about, for you, knowing how to achieve that, knowing the risks and the the benefits of that, and going into that, knowing that that's your outcome. For somebody else, it might be really natural birth. And so really what we're wanting to do here is to empower you with the knowledge to make informed decisions and understand the environment in which you are birthing. And so last week, Jules talked about 10 steps that you can, or 10 questions that you can ask your caregivers to help you really get clear on what it is that you want from them, in terms of your support, in terms of the birth outcomes. And so this week, we really wanted to go through perhaps some of Julie's own stories of the importance of having a good support team to help you fulfill your objective in your birth, and really looking at the shame and the guilt or regret that can come up if you don't get the birth that you wanted. The benefits of looking at the other side of what you want, so that you are not going into birth too polarized. Like we have these ideals held up about natural birth, or we have these ideals held up about, having pain relief and making sure you avoid pain. Well, as long as you're kind of thinking that it must be one way, you may often attract the opposite to get you to balance out your perceptions. So it's really about going into that with a healthy, balanced view about birth, a balanced view that's coming from a place of information, as opposed to just seeing how things go, which we know that often doesn't tend to go too well.
Definitely. Information is power.
Yes.
So I tell all of my clients, it doesn't matter what type of birth you are after, you need to know it all so that you always have a choice.
Yes, and that's what we often think that we're making a choice, but often our choice is within a very narrow paradigm.
Yes. You don't have choices if you don't know what your options are.
Yeah. So that's really what we're talking about today. So I'd love to dive in, Jules, with what you want to say.
I've got so many stories. There's like 500 conversations happening in my head at once. I really want to talk initially about leaving last week, the weakest link. We talked a little bit about our birth culture and how that filters down into what we birth with, and that 80%, our journeys of birthing ourselves is 80% predetermined by all of that stuff and how we were ourselves birthed. So if we unconsciously give birth, then we're really just going to repeat those patterns. And if we're consciously going to give birth, then who do we have around us so that we can change those patterns, shift those patterns, sit in that really uncomfortable place sometimes and really deal with some of those demons. So most women I find now that men have moved into the birthing culture, and Rhea talks a lot about this. She talks about a particular study that was done, that when men started moving into the birthing culture, they looked at the time that happened, and then at the same time the rate of intervention in birth. And interestingly enough, and you make your own conclusions about this, that the rate at which men entered the birthing room is exactly the same rate as which intervention went up.
Which is very interesting. And I think that also comes from almost a biological or sociological bent where men want to be the protector, and so they don't want to see their women suffering. I know Michael O'Dent, or Michelle O'Dent, however you say his name.
Michelle O'Dent,
he's a French obstetrician, and he's quite a pioneer in terms of natural birth and birth practices, and he still maintains that men shouldn't be in the birthing room.
He's fascinating. I love him. So it's really interesting, and generally what I've seen in most couple dynamics is that the guy's like, yeah, cool, and then all of a sudden they get there and their woman has a crisis of confidence, or something that she's looking at gives them the look that she's in such turmoil and physical pain that he loves her so deeply that he just wants her to stop, and he wants her to be okay, or he wants her to come back to normal. And so often we talk, there's a bit of, I suppose, this thing of, well, the epidural's really for the husband. And I've certainly been I know. I remember this one particular birth, when I think about that this woman was cranking, and her contractions were just doing fantastic stuff, and all of a sudden she had a crisis of confidence. And I felt like I was standing there with her, and I were eye to eye, and he went, oh my God, she needs the epidural. Why is this not happening? And he went running out of the birth room, screaming down the room to find someone who could come, because they were in a private hospital. They were paying for this sort of level of care. And where was it? You know?
My goodness.
And he comes tearing back in here. He's made such a furore that now there's people fussing everywhere. And he got that epidural. And that's part of their dynamic, is she just rolled with it.
Yes.
And he put the epidural in, and then they did an internal check, and she was fully dilated.
Wow.
Had they stopped for a moment, had he come back down into that birth space, had that process been to check her before an epidural was done, we would have thought in context, wow, she's right at the very end of this. Let's really nourish her with some support, because then she would have moved through to pushing. And, of course, once you have an epidural, you can no longer feel when you're having a contraction. You're on your back, so you're not using gravity. You're pushing against it. And so pushing and so on and so forth gets much more difficult. So it's really interesting, one, to think about who your support system is, because most women go, I love this man so much, and this is our shared baby and our shared experience, and they are just my rock. And I go, yes, they are, but they know nothing about being a woman.
Yes.
They know nothing about how your internals work, and they know even less about birth and how to deal with you in those circumstances. And depending on what those, I'm going to say, dependency dynamics are in that relationship, completely changes. Can that woman let herself go enough, because normally she's used to looking after him?
That is just so, I'm just getting tingles, because it's just such a wise way to come at things, isn't it? Because we so unconsciously go, oh, of course my husband's going to be there. You know, and most people will go on to choose that, and I probably still would, but that's, I guess, why somebody like a doula or somebody like a private midwife who you've got a very deep connection with is so important, because those relationship dynamics will play out.
They do. Let me tell you, they do. I have such beautiful insights into couples and relationships in those moments of high stress, really is what you're walking into. And I really want to hit home to you that choosing someone independent, a doula or a midwife, to be with you on that journey, whether it's at home or in hospital, doesn't take away from the role of the husband.
No.
If you've chosen really the right caregiver, their job there is to keep you two in a love bubble, so that he doesn't have to take on the responsibility of, how much is the timing? When do we need to leave? What do I need to pack? Is this okay? Is she doing the right thing? It alleviates all of that, because he can just be present in a really loving way to that woman. And that's exactly what she needs.
Yeah.
And then what she needs and what he needs is that woman to step in, that wise woman, and go, you know, this is what's happening now. How about we try this? Can you do this with her while I do that? So I really want to hit home that it's not about replacing. It's actually about strengthening your support circle. And women always look for the weakest link. You think you're not going to, but when you're in that moment and you're in a crisis of confidence, I have seen women, particularly in even home births where there might be 7 or 8 people in that room, walk around from person to person, and they'll try on whatever it is dynamic that works in their life. So it might be with mum, they need to have a really big sulk and a cry, oh no, I can't do this anymore, it's not working. And if mum's strong enough, she'll go, you're okay, love. And she'll go, oh, I didn't get that. She'll go to the next person, and she might be with her husband. This is shit, I need you to fucking stop this. And depending on where he's sitting with it, he's either going to go, yes, I'm getting you that epidural, or he's going to go, you're all right, love, and this is how we're going to deal with it. And he's going to lead her through that. And these women literally, like a checklist, will work their way around the room until they find the weakest link. So the idea is, don't have a weak link. If you have a mum or a sister or a friend who you love dearly, but who have had a different birth journey to the one that you're after, who have different viewpoints to the one that you have, if you have a really disconnected relationship to a mum or a sister, and they're in their birth space, or someone who represents them as an archetype, there's going to be a weak link there.
Yeah.
So you really want to plan your intimate support circle, the people that really intimately get you through your really hard times in labour, really well. You want to plan it really well. You want to have strength, people who believe in your power, who see birth as a process, who want to help you through it.
So this is about really bringing some critical thinking to that unconscious thought of, oh, I guess I'll just have my mum, or I guess I just have, it's about really
sometimes
thinking.
mum isn't the best person to have because there's too much shit there.
And also the mum, the mum wants to save you often.
Depending on how she views birth.
Yeah.
Yeah. So if she's the mum who isn't comfortable with pain, if she wants to save you, it's not going to work
and,
for you.
she's got her own fears.
Totally. If she's had really traumatic births, often she'll be triggered straight back into those. And so even though she's looking at you, she's having the feelings, the emotions attached to her experience and then playing those out really in your space.
Yes.
So you want to choose very wisely who it is that you have in that space, please. So that's really the intimate support circle. So I want to move on from that. And I really want to talk, which I know you have a lot of knowledge on, shame, guilt and regret on birth outcomes. Because I certainly have had a lot of women walk through my door who are so blindedly going for this type of birth.
Yes.
And that anything either side of that is not okay, and that is some way a reflection on who they are. So, these women generally are going to be, the fitness fanatics, and they are amazing in their body, and they know their bodies, and they hardline on their diet, and they hardline on...
They're all about control.
Yeah, well, they have very, very set belief systems on what it needs to be. And they don't see either side of that, or the blessings or the gifts of either side in that, and often these are the women that call in those experiences.
Yeah.
So really I want to hand over to you and see where you're sitting with that, because I know you have some real wisdom there.
That's a powerful one, because I think often when we are so one-sided about something, we're not seeing the whole picture, and so we will often create the other side in order to get us to love that whole thing. And so that can come in the form of, really, really, really wanting drugs, for example, and really, desiring that intervention, and then your labour happens so quickly that there's no time for it.
Yes.
And I've seen this happen with friends, and I'm like, that's interesting.
Yes.
And other times when you're really, really wanting a natural birth and you have the fear of the other side, you are polarised to think that a Caesar is going to be disastrous, I'm not going to be able to breastfeed, I'm not going to be able to do all these things that you want so badly, and then you might potentially have that experience because you are resisting that experience so much. And so this isn't about necessarily putting the intention to have that, but it's about balancing your view to see that something that you think is so terrible, like a cesarean, well, what are the benefits of a cesarean? You'll have possibly more support around you, when you take the baby home. You will, I don't know, we'd have to work on some of those because I'm pretty polarised. But, there will obviously be benefits in that birth experience for you and for your baby, because perhaps you might need to get in a lactation consult, you might need to resource up pretty quickly to help you initiate the things that you want, whether it's breastfeeding, whether it's somebody helping with meals. There will be benefits. And so it's about looking at those so that you, I guess, go in with intention, but also surrendering to the outcome.
And I really want to hit home, I find this with home birthers in particular, that they can be so set on, particularly home birthers that have come from a birth trauma in a hospital, and then have chosen home birth as a way of avoiding the trauma again in the hospital, as opposed to making it a choice based on a system of care, I suppose. That they become so... they get the hate on for the hospital, that it's anything that's in a hospital is now just shit, that there's always this negativity attached to them. And I really want to keep coming back, and I always challenge the women that I see on this, is birth. Whilst we talk about so much of our birth culture influencing the way that women birth, I want to really hit home to you that birth is an internal process. You are birth, not the place you birth.
Yes.
So I know this was my journey too, but by the time I got to my third baby, I knew, and whilst I had a home birth, I knew in my head, having witnessed so many empowering, beautiful births in a spectrum across all sorts of hospital systems and interventions, that birth can be beautiful and empowering no matter in what form it comes in. It just depends on how that woman has gone about her choices and her information, and how she uses her power in that care setting. So therefore, birth is internal. I am the birthing goddess. I birth this way, and whatever form it comes in comes to the blessings and the lessons. And it doesn't matter where I do that. So I could have had as beautiful a birth with my third child at home as I could have had in hospital. And I really got to that point where I was like, I'm actually kind of okay. If we go to the hospital, I'm going to be like, shit, yeah, man, I know I'm going to switch those lights off, and I'm going to have my music on, and I'm going to be telling the midwife this, and I'm just going to rock with this baby, and whatever this journey is going to be awesome for me.
Yeah.
So to really get to that place where, yes, your external care setting has changes in the limitations and the things that the rules and the guidelines, but at the same time, birth is an internal journey. It really comes back to what is your support system, where is your head at, what are your choices, where are your information, and, you know, where are you sitting in your feminine with that?
That is such a beautiful way to look at it. And I think that too then allows us to own more of the stuff that comes around birth, because birth trauma is a big thing that women are dealing with. But until we can in some way love it, we don't heal it. You know, in order to heal our pain, we need to see the blessings in it, because as long as we see it as negative or bad, it continues to run us.
It does. And I really, I think you and I have both discussed this, that some of the hardest, deepest, darkest parts of our lives have brought with them the most beautiful blessings and journeys and trips into self.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can be hard to rationalise that sometimes, and especially if you're listening to this and you feel a little bit of you feel affronted by us saying that. Well, that's kind of, for me, like a red flag to go, oh shit, there's stuff there to work on. And, you know, I'm sure I could listen back to this and feel exactly the same way.
Yes.
Depending on your frame of mind and what you're thinking about when you hear this kind of thing. Because to see that we are in some way kind of consciously creating or unconsciously creating an outcome, or have some way of going back and being grateful for something that we perceive as so bad, to see that there's benefits in that can be quite jarring. But in fact, that's ultimately where the healing is.
It really is.
And that's where the freedom comes from. And that's when, you know, because I see this same thing in, you know, sort of home birth or natural birth circles. There is a lot of, you know, people might choose a free birth because they're so, you know, polarised against this hospital system. But if they hate something, well, where's the opportunity to love it? Because as long as you're hating something, you're going to attract challenge in the way that, in the alternative that you think is going to save you, because you can't be one-sided. It's not a balanced view of the world to have such a negative view of something. So as much as we talk here about empowered birth, and, you know, we will talk, especially in the last podcast, about the 10 steps, the 10 questions to ask your caregivers, and to really think pretty critically about hospital practices. We don't want to get you so revved up and fired up that that's all wrong, because it's not wrong. It's just a system, and it's a system that's been designed as a one-size-fits-all model, which is beautiful in terms of efficiency and the economy and all those things. But it's whether you want to apply efficiency and the economy to your own personal birth.
Yes,
it's to understand the system in which we're operating, so that you are more empowered to choose a system that feels right for you.
That's going to support your choices.
Yeah,
absolutely. So maybe we'll just touch on birth trauma then, because I do birth debriefs, and certainly, particularly if I'm on second or third time mums that I'm birthing with them, we will always debrief their first 2 births as well, or however many it was. And Rhea Dempsey also does birth debriefs, and I'm sure that there's other doulas and midwives around that would do that as well. So a birth debrief is really when women who have already given birth have had an experience that's I don't want to say soul-destroying, but is sitting in a really dark, awful place with them somewhere. Maybe they have a lot of memory loss around it. That's a key sign of trauma. When you're going back through your birth and you just have time lapse, it's really foggy. You can't remember all of these hours or processes. Or I didn't realise that had happened, and then I ended up here. It's kind of a sign that you kind of left a little bit and you've come back. Yeah. So really a birth debrief starts you at the very beginning of your story, and you work through on a timeline of everything that medically was happening. So often a copy of your birth notes is that you receive from your caregiver is what would work with that. And then emotionally and mentally what was happening inside of you that you may not have spoken at that time. And so we really step a woman through that entire process, and out of that you can pull out some of the most extraordinary insights into who she was when she started that process of labour, how those belief systems or paradigms from her childhood have played out, how she was responded to, and therefore what were the outcomes of those challenges in those moments. And some of the most precious healing I have ever seen from women has happened in those birth debriefs, where all of a sudden it might be a statement that I might say like, my goodness, who taught you to be such a good girl, to follow the rules and not, you know, something like that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of this one woman who I said that statement to randomly, and she just went, oh my gosh. And all of a sudden, all this stuff unpiled from her childhood that made perfect sense in how her birth had played out. And then she was able to shift all of these things after that had happened in her birth, and she went on to have the most extraordinary second birth.
She's unencumbered by whatever.
Because she had shone the light of awareness and love onto these dynamics and onto this process that she no longer viewed as terrible and traumatic and scarring, that she viewed as something that created a new soul, a new self, and a blessing for her in that journey. And that is the purpose of a birth debrief, to let go of the shit that you're holding on to so that you can create a new wonderful experience moving forward.
And that being moving forward without the attachment or preconceived ideas, really is treating this as a new experience, not charged by anything else that might be coming up.
Yes,
that's
absolutely.
such an and that's really what empowered birth is, isn't it? It's coming at it from it with a clean slate in a way, without that stuff,
without the charge there. And I really want to say some of the most beautiful births I've seen have been births with intervention. So I have seen women move through natural births to the point of just absolutely feeling so completely strung out they've got nothing left to give, and have an epidural. And epidurals normally in natural birth would be going, well, you don't want to do that, because as soon as you can't move and you can't feel and you can't all these hormones stop working and your body stops working and your baby's pushing against gravity and all these negative things. But I have seen sometimes for those women in those moments when they surrender to that choice and they have an epidural, and all of a sudden they can sleep for 10 minutes or they can sleep between a contraction, and that baby just instantly shifts or turns. I have seen some of the most, I have been thinking of this beautiful birth that I had with a baby whose intestines were growing on the outside. So she knew that she was never going to get to touch her baby, that it was going to be whisked away, and she wanted the gift of a beautiful, gentle birth for this child so that he could be straight into surgery and have the best possible start.
Yeah.
And she had an epidural, and oh my God, I could nearly cry when I think about it. It was the most beautiful, centered birth I have ever seen. That were she really wrestling with contractions and pushing, could not have been as present as she was, because she was so present in every process. And I really want to say for women that have an epidural, it's very easy to all of a sudden dad sits in the corner and starts flicking through the sports page, and mum's having a manicure or chatting about the weather outside. And you've got to remember your body's still birthing.
Yes.
So it's very easy once you've been removed from that birthing process and those hormones are no longer clouding your conscious brain and taking you into the subconscious, it's easy just to sit back into that. And I really encourage my clients to then, once they have an epidural, we then sit and we're refocused on birth, and we're doing visualizations and we're doing meditations and we're doing mantras, and we're constantly still holding the birth space, because her body is still working really hard, even though she can't feel it.
And that's right. And those mantras, those intentions, those visualizations are still having
an effect.
Physiological
They
effect.
really seriously do. And so the women that I find that have had that experience and then they doing that, their bodies just work beautifully, and all of a sudden lots of fears and things that are really holding tight and holding that body tight can just relax that pelvis to the point where the baby can then turn where it hadn't been able to turn for the last 30 hours or whatever it was. And so back on this birth, so we were doing all of that stuff, and she was so present with her baby. She was constantly visualizing this baby surrounded by golden light. She was talking to it all the time. She had when it came time to pushing, she was squealed with delight, and she had a mirror there, and she was just loving every moment with such gratitude. Look at that hair. She's touching the baby's head, and she's watching this baby slide out of her body, and she is so preciously holding this baby's space. I want to say cry when I think about it.
I'm tearing up right here.
But this baby just slid out and, was whisked away instantly, and all of this medical stuff happened. But she was already a mother. She was so present that had she been completely, totally, rigidly holding on and wrestling those fierce contractions and whatever, generally I find women can be really hard to then also, particularly for first-time mums, stay present to their baby in that process, because their body's calling on them so much.
And perhaps, the beauty in that, might even be that she knew that her baby was going to be really challenged, and so that called her to be so present and to give that baby every ounce of strength that she had, spiritually, emotionally, physiologically. Like, that's a beautiful,
isn't it?
So
it was heaven. I can think of others, like even in terms of an episiotomy, I absolutely loathe seeing them anyway. And I remember this one woman was beautiful, and we had worked so hard, and she had got through I don't know, 3 days of pre-labour and then this 20-hour, intense labour because her baby wasn't quite sitting in the right position. So labour was on and off and on and off and a bit posterior and all this sort of stuff happening. And she got to the end and she was up to pushing and she was wrecked. And she was pushing and pushing and pushing and she's like, I can't fucking do this. I'm like, you can. What are you holding on to? Why is it that body didn't want to just release that baby out? What were the fears that she was holding on to?
Yeah.
And she looked at me and she goes, I don't fucking care, Julie. Give it to me like this. And so she called in this obstetrician. And so this obstetrician came in and normally they do an injection to numb the area and instantly their scissors are cut. And this obstetrician came in and she's like, oh, there's no way. That muscle band is so spasmed and so thick. There's no way that baby's coming out. So she goes with the injection and I kid you not, she did the injection. She turned her back to grab the scissors and that baby's flown out.
Wow.
It was amazing. And she went, what? That couldn't happen. And it was just almost for that woman was that last surrender.
Yeah.
And almost I feel like on some level it was that belief system that someone was doing it for her.
Yeah.
And it just was enough of a shift for her to surrender to that intervention she thought she was never going to have. And all of a sudden it just disappeared. That muscle band that was so tense and was never going to, I just have so many stories of the wondrousness of women's emotional state.
But that's our innate intelligence. Like the body has this innate intelligence, and that those kinds of stories that kind of challenge whatever kind of set of research that says X, Y, Z. There's those stories abound. In terms of our own power. To affect that kind of result.
Yes. I've seen amazing things. So I really, I can't remember how we got onto that. How did we get onto that?
I can't even remember. I just love talking about this. I could go forever.
I can't remember. Was it birth trauma, facing our fears?
Well, I don't even know if we've got to facing our fears. I'm pretty sure it came out of birth trauma.
Birth trauma. I can't even think where I was going. What do I want to say? Oh, empowered birth. That's what I was saying. So empowered birth is a total spectrum. And all of those women walked out of those births and they were in hospitals, they weren't intervention free, they weren't totally natural, but those women knew all of their choices and all of their options and they were ready with their partners to just rock on to the next thing whenever. And if something happened, the other really important thing to do actually is when a care team walks in and goes, well, look, we really need to start discussing this thing because it's no longer working. We may need to do these things. I always say to my clients, Dad's job is to ask all of the questions. Okay, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? What happens if we do it? What happens if we don't do it? What are the outcomes? How long do we have? His job is the fact-finding because Mum's still in labour land. And then he goes, thanks very much. Can you guys just leave us all alone for 5 minutes so that we can come down and have a chat about it? Don't ever make a decision when you're in the stressful moment of moving forward into intervention because that is when I see a lot of trauma happened. Women didn't have time to process it. They didn't have time to think about it. They didn't have time to feel it. They didn't have time to check in with their intuition. And things were done that they weren't ready for. But if Dad finds out all of the information and then Mum has time through however many contractions to really talk about it and in a space with a clear room. So you don't want to have someone that you feel you need to taper what it is that you're saying or that someone's eavesdropping on that conversation, offering another opinion. You just want 5 minutes of a completely clean room to reshift your energy. And even if you choose to go down that path, that your energy is back in the space of, I'm ready to move forward with this, rather than stuck in the trauma and the shock of the thing that's just been told to you.
I guess it's about really owning it, sort of making it
an empowered choice.
Yeah.
Yes. That this has happened. Okay, shit. That's not what we thought was going to happen. But hey, we know how this scenario plays out and here's how we can make it work with us and move with it. And as long as it's an empowered choice, it doesn't matter what the choice is, as long as it's empowered and that the mum has made that choice and that decision is really, I think, what shifts that space. So Dad's job has to be the questions. Mum's job has to be to tune into her intuition and to come back down from the stress before she's ready to make that decision.
Which are all, I think, probably big things to ask of yourself, I suppose, in a moment like that. But that's, I guess, comes back to that support and to that network that you've built around you to help you make those decisions.
And are there any alternatives? And if you've got another caregiver like a doula or an independent midwife, they might have suggestions for alternatives that may not be able to say in the presence of a hospital, because we're certainly not allowed to give medical advice in a hospital setting. But when the room is clear, it might be something you can check in with them about. I feel like I had something else then. I don't know. We'll come back to it. So facing our birth fears. So I really want to, flip back to this, that these women that, have these really polarized viewpoints of natural birth, how do we even those out? And really it's that in seeing whatever happens, whatever that journey is actually still perfect, because the more surrender, and often the more things that happen that you don't want, the more that you're required on to surrender. And often it's the women that really need to feel good in control, that their births don't go as planned because they require more and more levels of surrender. More surrender, more surrender. It's the hardest thing in the world to do, to let go of your mind and let go of your body and flow with it, and let go of a system and a belief system and outside fears and influences, and move through all of that. That's surrender. Surrender is incredibly difficult to do. So it's really good to get balanced on whichever way this goes. I'm okay because I know all my choices, I know all my options, and so does my support team.
That's a really powerful position to be in. And I still think, gosh, even for my next birth, when that happens, there's still so much work to do on that, because it really is constant work, isn't it? To really, because there'll be fears coming up all the time, We are a lived experience. And so we are living with what we've read, what the stories that our friends have told us, our mother's experience, our past experience. And we're going to be invited to feel challenged by those all the time on the journey of pregnancy. You've got nearly 40 weeks to kind of really feel confronted by a lot of fears, a lot of anxieties. And so comes back to that support network, comes back to really intentionally building a team around you to help you explore and heal those things so that you're not confronted with them in the labour room.
That's exactly right. I think the more work you can do in your labour, the less work in your pregnancy, the less work you'll have to do in your labour, absolutely, without a doubt. And also just walking into it going, I'm really excited. I walked into my births being really excited to see what the depth and the strength was that I had within me and where I was going to go and how that would all play out. And I was really, even in my first birth, I was naive about a lot of stuff. I had an independent midwife. And my husband still says, oh my God, best money we ever spent, because he just got to be with me on a really emotional level and do what he does best. The other stuff wasn't his area. And so he could really just hand that over and just really rock with me, feed me, give me drinks, and just love me up, rub my back when I needed it. And he had someone else there to really support that journey, to drive the car to the hospital, to do all of that stuff, which was beautiful for him. But I remember being really excited and challenged. This challenge, like women that run a marathon and they just want to challenge their bodies, or women that want to challenge their brains in different ways. They pick these, we're constantly picking these challenges so that we can live up to them and grow to our next level of being, whatever that is and whatever form that comes in. For many women, it comes in something different. And that was always for me what birth was, this calling in this moment to really see what you were made of. Yeah. And to even see what came up and know that, almost be excited about that level of therapy, because I had people around me that could work through that journey and kind of dig that gold out, I suppose is how I looked at it. And then by the time I came to having my second baby, we had a home birth. So I'd had stayed at home till I was about 7 centimetres, I think, with my first baby. And then we'd moved to a birth centre to give birth to him. And in the end, I gave birth to him like 45 minutes after being on this bloody hospital bed. And I thought, what the hell was the point in this? And so my second birth, I thought, I really do want to have a home birth. I want to stay at home and be at home and really just love in this really loved up, nourished space. And so I had 2 independent midwives for my second birth. And that was beautiful. I just remember giggling and laughing and having just the best old time, and the midwives just chilling out on the couch going, it's ridiculous, she's having too much of a good time. And I just I really want to transform women's perception of pain in labour. I think first time you really have to get real about it. Because it's the first time your body's done it, it's the first time it's stretched, it's the first time it's done any of that stuff, and it's really intense, and you have to be really intentional in how you set that up. But subsequent births, I think orgasmic birth, or that concept of it, is entirely possible. Not for first-time mums. You have to be way more conscious with your first in terms of pain dynamics. Yeah. But for second and subsequent pregnancies, I think it's completely possible. And I think it's something we don't talk about enough, because I certainly have had 3 of the most beautiful, life-defining births like if I could pick 3 of the best days of my life, that would be the 3 days I've given birth. I loved them. I loved the feeling of being so emotionally, physically and spiritually open, and each contraction felt like, instead of a contraction where you think about this pain, this feeling of this woman on this bed, I had this incredible spiritual awakening. I would kind of feel like I could be elevated to these levels of meditation, if you like, or spiritual connection that I never had access to in any of the meditations I've ever done in my whole life. It was this real thin veil between the worlds, I suppose. I had this opportunity to kind of soar there in between and then come back into my body, and soar there and then come back into my body. And each time I came back into my body, I got to be loved up by my husband. What could possibly be better than that? Soar to some spiritual levels, come back for some love. Like, just, it was heaven. And the night I gave birth to my second daughter, it was a balmy summer night. The next one over was playing blues on his guitar. Like, it was just, it was heaven. Yeah. It was heaven. And then, you know, I was just having too much of a good time. I think it went on too long. And it was only in the last, I was really not getting anywhere. I was having too much of a good time, I think. And my midwife
Do you think you're
said,
a little bit elated?
Maybe. My midwife went, okay, look, we can either keep going like this for however long, or maybe you could try squatting and doing these things, and maybe something will get moving. And I went, all right. Yeah. And so I did this thing that she was setting, and it's the first time I went, I get why women have drugs, because the minute I did the things that she wanted me to do, I had the most painful, intense contraction I've ever had. But you know what happened is it was incredibly painful and intense, but at the same time, I cried in that, and it really just allowed that emotional reconnection with the sensual, soft, vulnerable side of women and the feminine and birth. And my support circle went from being kind of around me and laughing and giggling to being very physically close to me and very in my space and very holding me and rocking my body and soothing me with words. It's a very, you know, and often the closer a woman gets to giving birth, that with unconsciously the closer those support people get to her physical space, almost like they realise unconsciously what she needs to be held in that space. And half an hour later, I had a beautiful baby, and what I thought, you know, would be in the bath or in the shower or whatever, I'd, you know, had a couple of these enormous contractions and just gone, fuck the carpet, I don't care. I'm just, you know, I remember my midwife going, baby's nearly here. Okay. And so I had this beautiful baby on our bedroom floor, which wasn't planned but was heaven, and I had our 18-month-old son with us for that as well. So I would love to do even another podcast on baby or raising children in terms of body consciousness, vaginas and birth. I find that's an incredibly difficult subject for a lot of people. And then my third birth, I'd gone through a miscarriage previous to that birth. So I had had a huge amount of fears, and you have had the same experience as well. So I think it would be really worthwhile spending a podcast on holding on to those feelings of your body being a tomb and not serving you, and how you move through those fears and what they play out as. So third pregnancy was incredibly big journey for me, as was the birth, because I kept working through these layers of fear of death, but they kept coming up. And so even in the birth, I was so sure that this wasn't it. It couldn't possibly be it, because I was just feeling so good. I was feeling so good. And I had this birth plan down to a T. I had a support person for each of my kids. I had my doula, I had my midwife, I had my second midwife, I had the support person who was going to give me homeopath. Like, I had the best team you could possibly have. And in the end, I gave birth with just my husband and my kids, and we'd just come back from a walk, and I gave birth in freaking 10 minutes from when we walked up the street, and my waters broke at the end of the street in this cataclysmic style Hollywood gush, which I'd never had previously. And so I'm bloody corner of the street with the dog on the lead and the kids, and I've decided I can't move or walk, and eventually we get back home, and I gave birth to my baby in a space where I had none of that stuff. So I had planned this perfect birth, and in the end almost got the exact opposite of that, because I had no one around. And in the end had a free birth. But the gifts and the blessings in that were extraordinary, because it was such a conscious birth. And I can honestly, from the bottom of my heart, say none of those contractions were painful. I never once experienced pain in my third birth. What I now realise was labour going on. I honestly thought was total pre-labour, not even getting into labour. And they were such beautiful, gentle, what I felt like were callings to just be in my body that I enjoyed so much, just sitting in my lounge room and doing some circular breath work with each one of those and laying on the couch and talking to my baby. It was just a really loved up space, and it was never painful, so it never occurred to me that I was in labour. But I think I just loved them so much, and I was so in my body that it was just not a painful. And you hear about this traditionally, that certainly in our really ancient cultures, birth isn't always seen as being something incredibly painful. And I really want to let women know that that whole process of orgasmic birth is actually possible. So, and in the end, our birth with her was me going, oh my God, the baby's head is coming, and my husband going, what? and dog still got his lead on, there's a light on in the house, no support people. And it was completely, I went through a lot of mourning of the birth that I had in my head.
Yeah, because you had this perfect
thing in my head, this beautiful hippie space,
Yeah.
And what I realised was this was her perfect blessing for us, because it was incredibly conscious. Because I felt and touched, like that mum we talked about before with the epidural, that was my experience in my third labour. I completely felt, saw, touched every inch of my baby's body, physically, spiritually, whatever, sliding through me and into my hands in a physical world and into my husband's. And we were the first people to ever touch her. And it was just us.
That's just
And it's an
beautiful.
extraordinary story to come. And the day she was born, actually, she was late as well. And the day she was born was the exact day a year earlier when we had found out that we'd lost the baby in that pregnancy. So I just felt like
it came full circle.
it was bigger than, what I even thought in my head it was going to be.
And she was showing you what you were capable of, and that you didn't need anything else.
Didn't need anything else, because birth is within.
It's birth. That really was that metaphorical full circle coming around, that your body showing you, hey, I don't fail you.
Yes.
Yeah,
you're right, it totally was. And beyond that I thought I needed this space to have this birth. And in the end I didn't. It was just me.
And it was all within you.
And my baby. Yeah, absolutely.
That is just such I love those stories. Love them.
Well, I really, and I feel that we don't talk about them. I certainly don't share my birth stories very often, because women who have incredibly traumatic birth stories are constantly needing to share them, because they haven't ever had a proper healing. So they need to unconsciously get rid of that story out of their bodies.
And that becomes a predominant story, which then creates fear.
Yeah, and then I feel like,
that cycle.
Who am I to say, well, there's no pain in labour. What are you talking about? Mine were amazing experiences. We don't share those. No,
it began, and I remember sitting around, my mother's group, the first meeting, babies were 6 weeks old, and everyone's sharing their horror stories, and I was kind of like, I almost had to rethink. Felt like I was almost having to redefine my experience based on the experiences around me, because because we are cultured to see birth as painful or just get it over and done with, or something to be avoided.
And it's interesting, because there's shame and guilt either way then, isn't it?
Yeah, there is.
Shame and guilt if you don't measure up.
Yeah.
One way or the other.
Yes.
Oh.
We're all just trying to find our way, and wouldn't it be great to break down some of those barriers and allow space for women to talk about their experience, whichever way it goes, without
and to be healed. Do you know what else I hate is that story of, well, don't worry about it, love, because you got a healthy baby.
Oh, yeah.
I can't tell you how many times I've had women come to me with that story, and I feel like it is so unjust, because those women have just gone through a rite of passage in their bodies, in their souls, and in their psyches. And you can't just sweep that under the rug and go, don't worry about it. You don't need to think about it. You don't need to heal it, because you've got a healthy baby.
And that's all that matters.
And that's all that matters. It doesn't. Birth is more than that.
And the babe, and your experience and your own perception of yourself in that experience, that will shape that child, so it's just as much of a...
Shapes her journey as a woman and as a mother moving forward.
It's just as much of a disservice to you to see yourself as, I'm invalid to have these feelings because at least I've got a healthy baby, because that's a disservice to yourself and your child, that you are not allowed to feel like you can go into that and heal that and feel valid in your sense of pain around something not going the way that you wanted it to go.
It's a trauma. It needs healing. It needs a voice, and it needs the light at the end of all of that.
And I think we focus far too much on that outcome and not about the, And
birth is always the journey. It's often not even the outcome.
No, because the outcome is just one piece of it, isn't it? It's all those. It's a sum of multiple parts. I think we're probably going to have to wrap it up there.
I know.
And I know we've gone over, but it was just, I think that there's so much to this topic. We will have to look at pregnancy after miscarriage and how that goes, because I think that, I know for myself, it was a, collection of pretty terrified few weeks until I felt like I'd got past that previous, point in time.
And miscarriage in general, because I think largely women don't have a voice in that.
Yeah, and I think you only realise how common it is when you yourself have experienced it and everyone else comes out of the woodwork.
Yes, it's exactly right. So I really hope wherever you are sitting in this week that you allow yourself the space and the freedom to really nourish and value the journey that you've come on to being a mother, and that you offer yourself some loving light on that. And if you need help, that you do actually seek it. So you can certainly resource me through naturopathicbirth.com.au and Bridget's work through suburbansandcastles.com.
Yeah, and I did write an article a little while back about birth culture, which is quite well referenced in terms of statistics and what we don't tend to know. I was referencing a lot of Rhea Dempsey's book. So look that up if you can. It's on my blog. And certainly please share your thoughts on our Facebook page. And if you feel willing to share your story, we'd love to hear it too. So until next time, we'll see you then. Bye.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/TheWellnessCouch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavour to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.